two families at war in rural Tennessee.
One crazy group living across the street from another crazy group.
At the most basic level, they antagonized the daylights out of one another.
Yeah, come on, you piece of... Come on back over here again.
After years of conflict, their heated rivalry finally explodes into violence.
This was coming to a head. Something very bad was going to happen.
And investigators must determine whether it was an act of self-defense or a deadly ambush.
There was more to this case than just neighborhood feud goes bad.
September 16th, 2013. It's a pleasant evening in the rural community of Union County, Tennessee. But around 10 p.m., the sheriff's office receives an emergency call about possible gunshots near Highway 370.
Highway 370, for the most part, it's a two-lane highway. There are neighbors around, but it's not a subdivision.
When police arrive, they see a man lying in a ditch on the side of the road, and it appears he's been shot several times. They tried to administer aid to the victim, but it was way too late. He had lost so much blood.
Deputies immediately recognized the victim as local resident Michael Woodby, a 45-year-old father and former repairman.
Michael Woodby and his wife, Teresa, were sort of part of the community. People knew them.
Michael Andrew Woodby was born on November 6th, 1967.
Michael was born in Middlesboro, Kentucky, raised in Tennessee, Campbell County, and Scott County.
When he became an adult, he moved to Detroit, Michigan. And there he got a job working on commercial kitchen equipment.
He went to all the restaurants and fixed all their equipment.
While living in Michigan, Michael started a family and had 2 kids. But the relationship didn't last. And in 1996, Michael met 31-year-old Teresa Molka. She also had 2 children from a previous relationship, and Michael's fun-loving personality quickly won her over.
He was a jokester. He loved giving. He'd gather up gifts all year round and hand it out to all the poor kids in the neighborhood at Christmas time.
Over the next 17 years, Michael and Teresa built a life together and raised their 4 children. But as empty nesters in their 40s, the couple began to face some unexpected challenges.
Because he was a large man and because of his physical condition, Michael ran into serious medical problems.
He had had some heart issues twice. Had a heart event back in 2008 and then another one in 2009. And he just couldn't get around like he used to.
While they're dealing with all of that, one of the daughters becomes pregnant and has a child, but she can't care for that child. So Michael and Teresa decided that they would.
In 2010, Michael and Teresa decided to make things simpler and moved back to where he grew up in rural Tennessee.
What I wanted was for our grandson to have stability and a forever home. It was getting really rough where we were living, and we just decided to come back.
They found a nice little house along the highway about 25 miles north of Knoxville.
The property we purchased had 6 acres almost. It has lake access all the way around it. It's close to the freeways, close to the hospitals.
Teresa took a job as a nurse, while Michael stayed at home to care for their grandson.
It's just a wonderful area to raise children in. We were happy with what we found. I mean, it was beautiful. The land was beautiful.
But now, Michael Woodby has been found shot to death on the side of the road, not far from their home.
Sheriff's deputies secured the scene, but keep in mind, this is a small department. They have limited resources, and they know they're going to need help dealing with such a serious case. So they call in the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation to help.
Special Agent Andy Corbett is immediately assigned to the case.
I met with the local sheriff's department there on the scene, and they shared what known information they had.
Michael's body is found lying on its left side, and a preliminary search turns up 4 9mm shell casings.
All 4 shell casings were in a pretty close proximity to one another, and also close to where the body was at.
They also find a wooden stick and a flashlight near his body, and they think he may have been holding those items when he was shot.
Since the Woodbys live nearby, investigators walk over to break the bad news to Michael's wife.
After I was told deceased, I lost my mind. It was a blur after that. It was a blur.
She's obviously distraught, but she's able to tell them as much as she possibly can. And what she does reveal is that she thought that her husband had gone out for a walk about 1/2 hour earlier.
He was walking to get exercise, and this was his way to hopefully improve his health condition.
It was very hot in the summer, so he preferred to go on his walks at night when it was cooler, and he usually took a walking stick.
Teresa said that a few minutes after Michael left, she heard gunshots, but at the time, she hadn't been worried.
He's a big man. He's not scared of anything, so I wasn't scared for him. My worry and fear didn't come on until I saw them police lights. And I thought, oh no.
Teresa told police that she thought somebody had ambushed Michael, and she said she had a pretty good idea of who it might be.
Coming up, investigators learn of a neighborhood feud like no other.
You see people not liking their neighbor. This takes it to a level that's unbelievable.
Detectives in Union County, Tennessee, are investigating the shooting death of 45-year-old Michael Woodby. But his wife, Teresa, believes she already knows who did it.
She tells police she's fairly certain it's a member of the Wagner family. Now, the Wagner family are neighbors, and the two families have had a long-running feud for a few years.
Get off it. I'm telling you right now.
They were, half an acre over. You could see the house, but, you're not like right in a suburb area where you're right next to each other.
Teresa tells police that when she and Michael first arrived, everything seemed fine.
We had gotten along with the Wagners when we had moved in. They were the first ones to come over and welcome us into the neighborhood.
The problems began when the Woodbys discovered their new neighbors were operating a gun range on their property.
The Wagners would allow people to test fire weapons and also recreationally fired weapons at that gun range.
Keep in mind, this was a rural area of Union County, and there was nothing per se illegal about firing weapons on your own property.
We're not talking about gunfire now and then. We're talking about constant gunfire. The Woodbys had moved to this very neighborhood so that they could raise their grandson. They went to the Wagners, asked for them to tone it down, and they claimed that the Wagners would not listen.
That's what they did every time I stepped out the door. I heard the gunshots myself.
But it wasn't until March of 2011, about 8 months after they moved in, when their feud really started.
Mr. Woodby had suffered from a heart condition and had come home from the doctor and was trying to rest.
The near constant gunfire was bad enough, but according to the Woodbys, the Wagoners started actually using explosives on top of it.
The Wagners were constantly shooting and blowing up explosives that caused him problems, that it was keeping him up.
Teresa tells investigators it got so bad that Michael finally had to confront Kevin Wagoner.
Michael had went over there and asked them to stop. And their response was, "Get the out of here."
Mr. Wagner said basically he'll do what he wants on his own property.
He came home. He was very upset. He couldn't understand how people could be that way.
After that, the noise only increased, and so did Michael's frustration.
He continued to grow upset because every time they were asked to stop, they would step up that game and do something worse.
Kevin had stationary surveillance cameras pointed at the Woodby's house, recording constantly. And he also had handheld video recorders every time the Woodby stepped outside. They were under surveillance.
Everything from doing yard work to out playing in the front yard with their grandchild.
We were not sure why he was videotaping our grandson. We had asked for it to stop numerous times. And the more we had asked for it to stop, the stronger it continued. I had never dealt with anything like that before, so I just thought they were crazy.
Teresa says Kevin wasn't the only one videotaping them. He involved his wife and children, too.
Either Kevin Wagner himself or his daughter or his son or his wife was filming them constantly.
Colton, the son, went armed. Kevin Wagner went armed. They patrolled the streets.
It was a constant tense situation.
Soon the Woodby's simple noise complaint had escalated out of control.
This feud between the Woodbys and the Wagners was really unlike any other feud that I have seen. This small disagreement and then boom, we're at war.
According to Teresa, the Wagners would point guns at them, use binoculars to spy on them, and make serious threats.
Teresa says they called the sheriff's office many times, but nothing ever changed.
You know, feuds between neighbors have been going on since the beginning of time, really. And it runs law enforcement ragged.
Law enforcement simply we do not have the ability to make people get along.
This goes on for a full year. So finally, in March of 2012, the Woodbys tried to get an order of protection against the Wagners, but they were denied.
To prove that the Wagoners had been obsessively recording and harassing them without provocation, the Woodbys ultimately decided to fight fire with fire.
Michael decides that he's going to start videotaping the actions of the Wagners so he can build a case. So he has some evidence, and hopefully that would be enough to make the Wagners stop.
I don't know how they do this 24/7.
I don't either.
I'm tired of holding this camera 10 minutes into it. I mean, come on.
We have more time when we get break.
Obviously.
But no one realized how far the Wagoners were willing to go to win the war. Coming up, a neighborhood feud takes a dangerous turn.
He was videotaping our grandson and carrying a gun at the same time.
Less than an hour after Michael Woodby was found shot to death near his home in rural Tennessee, investigators have a person of interest. In fact, they have several.
There was a long-standing feud between these two families, and Michael's wife, Teresa, was convinced that it was someone in the Wagner family that did the shooting.
Teresa tells detectives that the bad blood between the families had been going on for more than a year, when in 2012, the Wagoners suddenly escalated the conflict.
Reportedly, they started calling law enforcement and making up allegations against the Woodbys, and also apparently tried to get his disability taken away from him.
Hi there, my name is Kevin Wagner. I have information about Michael Woodby. If he's disabled, then I'm Mickey Mouse. And I have proof, anything you need.
According to Teresa, Kevin Wagner even called child services and made false allegations about the way they were treating their grandson.
The final straw came when Teresa says they caught Kevin Wagner's 21-year-old son, Colton, in the bushes, videotaping their 4-year-old grandson.
That is what incensed them the most, is that an innocent child out in the yard playing would be videotaped.
It was dangerous. They would videotape my grandson getting on his preschool bus with a gun in their hand, to the point where the bus driver wouldn't even come to the house to pick my grandson up anymore. She was terrified for the other children.
On May 30th, 2013, just 4 months before the shooting, the Woodbys once again tried to get an order of protection. But just like their previous attempts, their request was denied.
I have never been videotaped by a neighbor every day of my life, 24/7, whether I came out at nighttime or in the morning. Neighbors don't do that to one another.
According to what Teresa has told police, it seems that the Wagners' campaign of harassment was taken to the next level, leading Kevin to eventually shoot Michael.
I had thought that they ambushed him in the dark on his way back from his walk.
But Teresa's account of the feud isn't proof of murder. So Special Agent Corbett heads up the hill to interview the Wagoners, where sheriff's deputies have already taken 42-year-old Kevin into custody.
According to police, Kevin comes out of his house and he's holding his Glock 9mm handgun. So they take the gun away from him and they hold him.
Kevin Wagner was placed in the back of a patrol car. He was not combative, and he was cooperative. He agreed to speak with me.
Kevin Lee Wagoner was born on August 5th, 1971, in Elkhart, Indiana.
He enjoyed baseball when he was a kid, so we a lot of times I remember playing catch.
He was always outgoing. He'd talk to anybody. He was a great guy, would give the shirt off his back if he had to.
After high school, Kevin planned to become a police officer. But his dream had been shattered during his final baseball game.
There was an accident, and the kid that they were both running in the outfield for a fly ball, and the kid hit him in his ear, and it broke his collarbone and his canal to his ear and everything. So he lost the hearing in his ear. So he could never be a police officer.
Kevin decided to switch gears, attending Indiana University in 1990. It was there he met his wife, Kennette.
The two fell in love and Kennette got pregnant. So he dropped out of school and they got married in 1992. When Colton was born, Kennette decides that she's going to stay home and raise the child. Kevin goes out and gets a job as a purchasing agent.
He'd done a lot of warehouse stuff, supervising, I guess, over shipments and in and out.
Soon after, their daughter Kelsey was born. The family stayed in Elkhart for the next 15 years. But by 2009, the Wagoners decided it was time for a change.
The kids were teenagers and they decided they wanted warmer weather, so they packed up and moved down here to Tennessee.
Kevin wanted to live off the land, raising the chickens and goats and things like that.
That June, the family moved into the house on the hill overlooking Highway 370.
He bought this property because it did have a lot of land and kind of a mountain area where he could use as a shooting range. They like to go shoot.
The Wagner residence consisted of a house, a shed, and then another third building.
Kevin decided he would refurbish that building and turn it into a gun shop. And by the end of the year, he opened for business.
But in August of 2011, Kevin got the opportunity to work as a security guard for the Knox County school system.
He always wanted to be a police officer. Being a security guard was the next best thing, and he loved it.
But Kevin's dreams have been put on hold, as he is now the main suspect in his neighbor's murder. Coming up, Kevin Wagoner tells detectives his side of the story.
Mr. Woodby told him he was going to spread his son's brains all over Highway 370.
The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation has taken 42-year-old Kevin Wagoner in for questioning about the murder of his neighbor, Michael Woodby. But Kevin's version of events turns out to be very different from what they've heard so far.
Kevin did not shy away from stating that there was this ongoing feud, but there was a difference of opinion or of what caused the relationship to sour.
Kevin says the trouble began in the spring of 2011, about 8 months after the Woodbys moved in, and about 2.5 years before Michael was murdered.
Kevin Wagner's version of why this conflict started was that he said Mr. Woodby came over and wanted to buy a weapon from his gun shop.
Michael Woodby asked my brother that if he could purchase it without doing a background check.
Michael Woodby had run-ins with the law in his past, and as a result of that, he had a felony conviction. It was something fairly minor, but in Tennessee, if you are a convicted felon, you can't have a weapon.
Essentially, my brother told him no, that he couldn't do that he could lose his license.
But Kevin says Michael wouldn't take no for an answer, despite his drug conviction. Instead, Michael suggested they let his wife buy the gun for him.
It's called a straw purchase. And what that essentially means is that someone else's name is put on the paperwork. It's a legal loophole, and most people tend to get away with it unless that gun is used in the commission of crime.
Kevin refused to sell Michael a firearm in contravention of federal and state law. And that was the beginning of the end of their relationship.
Kevin says that's when the Woodbys suddenly changed their attitude about the gun range.
They had to shoot the guns in order to make sure they worked before they could sell them. So Woodbys didn't like it that they could shoot the guns and wouldn't sell them one.
Kevin told police that when all the noise complaints didn't work for the Woodby family, they took it to the next level and started making threats against the Wagners.
Oftentimes, it was very petty. You're looking at me, you're looking at my wife, you're looking at my child, you're looking at me cross. There were lots of accusations.
Mr. Woodby and his wife would call the police quite often. The police would never find anything and never made a report of any incident that went on. So he would ask the police what he needed to do with his neighbor, and they advised him that he needed to record incidents that took place.
They needed something that had a date and time stamp for them to be able to do something to Mr. Woodby.
Just like the Woodbys had, Kevin Wagner tells police he bought the handheld cameras to gather evidence for a restraining order against the Woodbys.
The reason why every moment was being recorded by the Wagners is because over the course of time, the incidents started to increase in frequency.
People are freaks!
Kevin says that in August, Michael assaulted him in their yard. But Michael threatened to do even worse to his son, Colton.
He said he wanted to kill him, that you're not going to miss your son. I'll go to prison, that you won't have your son no more, kind of comments.
Mr. Woodby told him he was going to spread his son's brains all over Highway 370.
Kevin says that when the court refused to grant a restraining order, he decided to go public.
In early September of 2013, we had a package arrive in the newsroom, and it was a DVD. So we pop it in to watch it, and it's footage of this Union County neighborhood, and it captured a screaming match between Kevin Wagner and Michael Woodby. Also in that package was a letter and a stack of documents from Kevin Wagner where he lays out his case that Michael Woodby is dangerous, violent, is out to get them, and law enforcement wouldn't do anything. And it was essentially a plea to the media to get involved.
But the strategy seemed to backfire, leading to a direct confrontation on the night of the shooting.
Wagner stated that he was out for a night walking with his son.
They were going to go down the street and check on an empty house that they had told the lady that lived there that they would do periodically, make sure nobody was breaking into it.
Kevin and Colton claimed that when they got there, they found Michael Woodby outside acting strangely.
According to Kevin, Michael was drunk and attacked them without warning.
Kevin Wagner stated that Michael Woodby was coming at him with this stick, attempting to strike them.
He was screaming at Woodby to get back. He wasn't sure what was going on, but Woodby was coming after his son again.
In fear for his son's life, he shot Michael Woodby and killed him in self-defense.
Kevin said he was the one who made the call to 911, and that's how the sheriff's department found out about the shooting.
When investigators speak to Colton, he tells a similar story.
Colton Wagner stated that Michael Woodby struck him with a large stick, specifically on the shoulder and the head.
But will the evidence support their claims of self-defense? Coming up, investigators discover there's still more to the story.
You could look at it as it was all part of this sort of diabolical plan.
Kevin Wagner has just confessed to killing his neighbor, Michael Woodby, but he insists it was necessary to protect his son.
He said Michael Woodby was coming at them, swinging this stick. At that time, he opened fire.
But something doesn't sit right with investigators.
I found there to be some inconsistencies in their stories.
Colton said Michael hit him on the head, but according to police, Colton did not appear to have any injuries, and he refused to go to the hospital for treatment.
The biggest thing is that Mr. Wagner stated that the shooting occurred on his side of the road, what we would call the Wagner side of Highway 370.
However, Michael's body wasn't found on the Wagner side of the highway.
All of Mr. Woodby's belongings, including that stick, are in the ditch on Mr. Woodby's side of the road.
If police are to believe Kevin's story, Michael would have had to make his way across the road with the stick in his hand, with a flashlight in his hand, after being shot 4 times and collapse in a ditch.
And what belies that, first, is that there's no blood in the road. That was something they searched extensively for. And the shell casings that were found were over 25 feet away on the other side of the road on Mr. Woodby's side.
Detectives confront Kevin about the discrepancies in his story, but he refuses to budge. So less than 24 hours after the murder, they decide to charge him with criminal homicide, and his son is charged with facilitation.
He couldn't believe that we were actually charging him for this, that he felt that it was, that it was a self-defense type issue.
I was shocked, to say the least. I mean, that's not Kevin. Kevin has been around guns all of his life. There's never been a question of him harming anybody.
Armed with a search warrant, investigators descend on the Wagner home, seizing boxes of video recordings, weapons, and computers.
There's 100 to 200 hours of video recording that we recovered. Then there was about 180 hours of audio recording.
It soon becomes clear that Kevin Wagner wasn't just collecting evidence against his neighbors. He was obsessed with them.
I've never seen anything like it. You know, you deal with people with surveillance cameras around their home. Never seen anything like this.
At first glance, the contents of the videotapes appear to support Kevin's claims.
Some of the recordings from the Wagners would capture Michael Woodby at his worst. He would say things toward them, hateful things.
Come on. Yeah, come on, you piece of. Come on back over here, Jeff.
But it contained no lead up to the actions of Mr. Woodby. We thought that was odd. It contained only excerpts of the most egregious acts of Mr. Woodby. And it would lead one to think that Mr. Woodby was, oh my gosh, he's a horrible neighbor.
But after reviewing all of the footage, investigators believe Michael had been goaded into those outbursts.
You could tell that he wasn't just out there just yelling for no reason. It was always about something that the Wagners had done prior to those cameras coming out.
They would taunt him to the point where he would come out yelling. And the minute he would start yelling, they would turn that camera on to make it look like he was just coming after them for no reason at all.
Tell you right now. I'll show you right. I don't give Son, you got a gun out here again. I do. Big deal. Yeah, it's illegal. Yes, it is. Go in. Yes, it is. Right there.
Mr. Wagner chose to walk back and forth in front of their residence. It was simply to antagonize the Woodbys.
They even find a recording where Michael tried to end the conflict.
Why can't we be good neighbors? Why can't we be good to one another? Why do we got to continue this? I'm asking. I'm begging. For your family and mine.
On at least 2 occasions that we know about, he asked them to end the conflict.
Please, stop.
And they declined both times.
The most damning evidence is a recording that suggests Kevin had been planning to kill Michael. It was one of the few recordings he didn't send to the media.
I don't grasp how it is that you can be so oblivious to your true surroundings and how close you are to dying. This is 100% within his control now, not to die from me. And he's choosing to come straight at it.
The audio snippet of where he actually talked about killing Michael Woodby, and that wasn't included in the packet. And there were all kinds of different things like that. What he didn't send was more telling than what he did send.
The results of Michael's autopsy confirms detectives' suspicions. The shooting was not an act of self-defense.
The evidence showed that there was 4 shots or 4 rounds that were fired to Michael Woodby.
On May 1st, 2014, almost 8 months after the shooting, Kevin Wagner is indicted by a grand jury for second-degree murder. His son, Colton, is also indicted as a co-conspirator.
What the prosecution did at that point was then to separate the 2 cases, and Kevin Wagner was set for trial first.
At that point, they thought they had a relatively strong case. But of course, we know there's never a promise of conviction.
If you have a prosecutor that tells you they know how a trial is going to end up, I don't think they're being candid with you. You never know what a jury is going to do.
Coming up, Kevin's trial takes an unexpected turn.
I think the prosecution was just as shocked as everybody else.
Kevin Wagner and his son Colton have both been charged in the murder of their neighbor, 45-year-old Michael Woodby. And on August 25th, 2015, 2 years after the fatal shooting, Kevin is the first to stand trial.
My thoughts and prayers were that they would be convicted. All the meanwhile praying, God forgive me for feeling that way about somebody.
Prosecutors describe Kevin as a man so obsessed with his war against Michael that he was willing to do anything to win it.
They argue that Kevin deliberately pushed Michael Woodby to the edge, to the breaking point, so that he could capture his apparently maniacal behavior on camera, and that Kevin used his own son as bait. Sending those DVDs to the media set up his claim of self-defense.
We believe that was a planning packet for him to lay the groundwork when the opportunity presented itself that he could murder his neighbor.
And 3 days after Kevin sent those DVDs to the media, an opportunity presented itself.
Mr. Woodby was walking on Highway 370, as he often did, with a walking stick in one hand and a flashlight in the other.
When Michael Woodby saw Kevin and Colton, both sides do what they do, and that is they start yelling at each other.
Based on the forensic evidence, prosecutors believe Michael was turning to walk away when Kevin pulled the trigger 4 times.
It appeared that the last 2 shots fired at him happened after he fell to the ground.
We think that this was an opportunistic killing.
But the defense sees things differently.
The series of events that led to Michael Woodby being shot that evening, what brought the 3 of them together in the dead of night in the middle of that road, there is no doubt in my mind that Michael Woodby struck Colton Wagner with that stick.
Kevin took the stand to testify in his own defense, and he described for the jury the harassment and threats that led up to that fateful night, and especially the attack on his son. Kevin tells the jury he felt he had no choice.
After deliberating for 2 days, the jury reports that they are hopelessly deadlocked.
Unfortunately, it declared a mistrial. They were not able to come to a conclusion.
Obviously, we were happy that it turned out hung jury. We kind of wanted a acquittal, but it didn't happen.
As the state prepares for the second trial, they make a surprising decision. They drop the charges against Colton, citing lack of evidence, and subpoena him as a witness instead.
Essentially, they were going to not only retry Kevin Wagner, but they were going to use his son against him.
On August 2nd, 2016, the second trial begins.
We were better prepared, I believe, and had a lot better grasp of all of the recordings during the second trial. When you're talking about over 300 hours of recordings, that's an enormous undertaking.
Colton took the stand, trying desperately to defend his father. But the prosecution was able to take his testimony and poke holes in a lot of it.
The prosecution was able to show through Colton and the videos how Colton himself was being used by his father as part of this vendetta or obsession with the Woodbys.
This time, the prosecution is also armed with new video evidence, proving this wasn't the first time Kevin had clashed with a neighbor.
He testified on the under cross-examination that he had had incidents in Indiana, and he had recorded people in Indiana, and that was something that very much hurt his credibility.
When Kevin started testifying, it unraveled very, very quickly. His lack of regret, his inability to effectively detail to the jury any mistakes that he made, to me, were his ultimate undoing.
On August 10th, 2016, the jury finds Kevin Wagner guilty of second-degree murder. He is sentenced to 18 years in prison.
There was sort of this shock feel in the courtroom. You could hear Kenneth, Kevin Wagner's wife, kind of yell out. Teresa Woodby started crying. It was very emotional.
I cried for not only myself, but for their family also. That's a terrible thing to happen. What happened? It was awful.
Although the verdict brings some relief to one of the families, the devastating effects of their deadly feud will linger for generations to come.
He was my home. Everything. My joy, my laughter, my partner, my friend, my confidant, my uplifter.
Part of the big tragedy of this case is that really it didn't have to happen. If these two families had just been willing to sit down and compromise, none of this would ever happen. No one would be dead. No one would be behind bars.
The best way for this feud to have been resolved would be under the premise of love thy neighbor. We all have, shortcomings in life, and sometimes we just have to look over the shortcomings of others, put that behind us, and move on and get along with one another.